Hello, everybody. Lucky to have a couple smart guys to talk with us today about what's going on in Afghanistan. I'm going to be kind of in and out of the stream. We have our producer who is in the other room right now with Lynn, my husband, who is in the middle here. Lynn, I'll let you introduce yourself in a second. Michael Yon is underneath Lynn there. You see him. He is a war correspondent, also former Green Beret. Guys, I'm going to first play Biden's speech. I guess I should just quickly say, Lynn, before that you were a reconnaissance Marine and Scout sniper deployed to Afghanistan multiple times, but then you give everybody the detailed rundown. And Michael, it's the same for you. But let's just listen to this clip real fast. And I'd love to get your reactions first to this speech. And then I just want to tell everybody that's in the chat that if you have questions, this is a great time to ask them. Like I said, I'm kind of useless in this particular stream, but I've got these guys who know a ton about this. I've been over there multiple times, and so this is your chance to ask them anything. So please do that. I'm going to be checking questions on Locals as well as ROKFIN. We're live on ROKFIN and YouTube. So definitely let me know what's going on. Oh, ODYSEE as well. So let's listen to this first, guys. Let me know if you can't hear it, okay?
There was no status quo of stability without American casualties after May 1. There was only the cold reality of either following through on the agreement to withdraw our forces or escalating the conflict and sending thousands more American troops back into combat in Afghanistan, lurching into the third decade of conflict. I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces. That's why we're still there. We were clear-eyed about the risks. We planned for every contingency, but I always promised the American people that I will be straight with you. The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated. So what's happened? Afghanistan political leaders gave up and fled the country. The Afghan military collapsed, sometime without trying to fight. If anything, the developments of the past week reinforced that ending U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan now was the right decision. American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves. We spent over $1 trillion. We trained and equipped an Afghan military force with some 300,000 strong, incredibly well equipped, a force larger in size than the militaries of many of our NATO allies. We gave them every tool they could need. We paid their salaries, provided for the maintenance of their Air Force, something the Taliban doesn't have. Taliban does not have an Air Force. We provided close air support. We gave them every chance to determine their own future. We could not provide them was the will to fight for that future.
Okay, so my just two bystander takeaways from this. Number one, not going to make a difference if we stay another year, 5 years. This could have happened 5 years ago, 5 years from now. And then also just basically blaming Afghanistan. That's what I got. You know, the two big points was like, we just got to do this, rip the Band-Aid off. It's not going to get any better. And then it's basically Afghanistan's fault. Those are my two big takeaways. I don't know about you guys. Michael, you want to go first?
Well, you know, since 2006, when I first went to Afghanistan, I took a break from Iraq and went to Afghanistan and saw immediately and started writing in 2006 that I thought that this would end badly. So ultimately that it's ending badly is not a surprise to me. However, the fact that he did more, yeah, he just ripped the bandage off all right with a chainsaw. I mean, we could have done this in a more methodical way, and certainly leaving behind a force, a much smaller force, to do counter. He's done more than rip the bandage off. He's literally come in with a chainsaw and cut our legs off. I mean, closing down Bagram early, for instance, that could have been a support air base for what's going on now. Right now, for instance, last night, I've got a lot of friends on the ground there, and friends flying around over there. You know that they've allowed the Kabul Air Base or airport to be overrun. You've seen people. You may have seen videos of people flooding onto the runways. People grasping onto the C-17 aircraft, actually falling off as they're taking off. I don't know if you've seen that. They're actually like Indians on a train, except it's Afghans on an airplane. And this has just been done in such a terrible way. I have friends over there right now. We're trying to get them out, and whether or not we're going to be able to get them out is unclear, because they have seized the enemy has seized a lot of documents. They have already had a lot of spies, of course, within the various ministries and the army and whatnot, and a lot of collusions going on. Obviously, they're already torturing people. We know that. They're murdering people. So they're going house to house already. For instance, in Farah, I was told a couple of days ago, and Farah city is the province. There you go, is the capital of Farah province, a place I've been many times. And they, told the government workers to come in. We'll give you new ID cards. And then they started beheading people, right? And they gave them ID cards, actually, and then let them go home, and then went to their homes later that night. That sort of thing is going on. In other cases, they are actually letting people keep their weapons. So it's not actually one deal across the country. It's got a lot of texture. I've got people in various provinces that are all telling different stories. But the bottom line is, when you're fighting Pashtuns, and most of the Taliban are Pashtun, their cultural habit for fighting is to always pursue a fleeing enemy. They've done this for centuries. It's like a border collie. You know, if you run in front of the border collie cannot resist chasing you. That's what Pashtun do. So, people are asking, do you think that they're going to, keep fighting and attacking Kabul airport? Oh, absolutely. That's what they do. Border collies chase, and so do Pashtuns.
Yeah, if I could add to that too. I mean, that's the thing when you're dealing with a culture like that. The comment I think you made the other day, Michael, in regard to you don't end that in just 20 years. That's absolutely right. You're talking about at least 3 generations deep that you would have to go for that, and it's kind of. It's just, it would make you want to ask the questions like, what in the hell were we doing there to begin with? I was there. I was in Afghanistan. The first time I went in Afghanistan was 2004. I went into parts of Afghanistan where they didn't even, they thought we were still Russians. Yeah. And I know you.
Even in 2011, they were saying that, Lynn. Even in 2011.
Yeah. So. And so that's the thing is, like, I saw some of the comments in the stream. They certainly, our leadership hasn't run Sun Tzu. They don't, and they thought they could win this in a 3-block war. That's on them. But the thing is like, you either commit or you don't commit, and that's, to me, that's the big thing. And understanding what those goals were, and to begin with those goals is that this was a strategic position. When you look at Afghanistan on a map, it's only the size of Texas, right? And so therefore, you've got Afghanistan, you've got Iran, which is a major nuclear power, whether anybody wants to admit that or not. And then you have Iraq. Iraq has approximately 36 miles of coastline. So as far as pre-deployment, pre-positioning of assets and forces, like nobody was so naive, at least not anybody in the groups I was running in the jobs that I had in the Marine Corps. Nobody was so naive to think that all of a sudden all the Afghans were going to just like get rid of their culture and their background and be like, oh yeah, we're going to be this republic democracy. That's not at all what was going to happen. Right. And nobody thought that way. We knew that the purpose of that was to have a remain behind element force in place for strategic and tactical positioning for that exact reason, the prevention of having an area where terrorists can have a stronghold to train and equip themselves and prepare to bring the fight to our country. And so on one hand, I'm not saying we need to be in that country forever and ever, amen, fighting wars. At the other hand, you don't just totally create a vacuum. To me, it's totally reminiscent of the last time that Biden was in office as vice president and towing the party line with President Barack Obama and saying, oh, they're just JV. And I love how all of a sudden I saw a meme today on Facebook, and they're like, now all of a sudden we have a whole bunch of Afghanistan experts running around. And it makes me want to ask the question too, is like, hey buddy, where the heck were you back in 2011 when the last time I deployed for the military to Afghanistan? And we literally deployed 2 weeks after they had killed Osama bin Laden. And everybody was asking a bunch of questions like, oh, what do you think it's going to be like now that he's gone or whatever? And it's like, we're going to be encountering the same people. We're going to, like, the Taliban, they are the students, just like Al-Qaeda is the base, literally translated to that. When you're dealing with a true believer, you have to be ready and willing to go the full measure. Or as my grandfather would say from World War II era, go the whole 9 yards. And when you look at like Russia, for example, the most casualties that Russia incurred was when they were actually in their retrograde from Afghanistan. So you had Alexander the Great. He was the only one that actually realized that in order to have any change on the culture there, you had to basically stay. And even then, they still had the same outcome. You had the British, you had Russia, and now you had us, and we helped get Russia get out of Afghanistan. So it's just crazy to me how we're repeating history right now. But the real cost in my eyes is, all that money that we spent, and we left them with all the equipment, everything we need. We just handed all that equipment over to the Taliban, just like in Iraq. We just handed all that equipment over to ISIL or ISIS or whatever they decided to call it. And that is exactly what happened today. And I think it's amazing that, a few days prior, he got on there and said, no, that's not what's going to happen. We're not going to see people hanging from helicopters and holding on to aircraft and stuff, trying to get out of there. And what do we got? We have that exact thing. So if we can't handle that situation in a location the size of Texas, how do we, the world's greatest military force, expect to be able to deal with threats like Iran, China, and Russia?
Okay, real fast, I wanted to just bring up, this is an article from the Wall Street Journal in June 23rd. Afghan government could collapse 6 months after U.S. withdrawal, new intelligence assessment says. And I should say that was my third point I got out of Biden's speech was, well, that happened faster than we thought. Now, I was listening to somebody this morning on YouTube that was like, really? Because were you the only one that thought it was going to happen that fast, or are you lying? And I think that is kind of a fair question. Like, did they really think this wasn't going to happen, or did they tell us they didn't? We've equipped them, and just to kind of keep everybody's nerves down. Michael, and I should also add that you guys have different backgrounds and you have different opinions on this, and I hope nobody feels like they have to agree on everything. Like, please share your unique perspectives and in the chats as well. It's obviously a contentious issue, and it should be hashed out with people who, have different perspectives. So please, Michael, please, if you don't mind, enlighten us here on this one, and then Lynn, go for it after that.
And first of all, most importantly, though, we obviously we all three love America. So we want the best for our country. We don't want to see our country torn apart. So if we have to argue and hash things out, that's just normal. That's what people like us should do. We should argue a lot so that we can try to, see each other's points and that sort of thing. But, Dave Petraeus told me a couple of months ago, he's like, you should go back to Afghanistan. I was like, nope, I'm finished. Because when I left in 2011, I realized we just I first went in 2006 and I kept going back and forth between Iraq and Afghanistan and hitting the Philippine War and some fighting in Thailand and stuff. And I realized Afghanistan, I'm not going to risk my life here anymore. I mean, I'm going out to places like Sangin, where Lynn, is the most dangerous district. You've probably been there, the most dangerous district in all of Afghanistan. I have almost 400 districts. I was out there and all that stuff for a long time, 2 years, right? And finally, I just realized this is just Nonsense. Nobody's changing. They're just going to stay here and be Afghans. And that's all that's going to happen. That's fine. Just don't do terrorism against us. Now, as you mentioned earlier, very importantly, it's a strategically important place, but almost everywhere is strategically important for one reason or another. Some people will say, well, you're just there for the oil. And I'm like, well, there's no oil, okay? There's a lot of minerals, and there's pipeline territory. There's those sorts of things. Certainly, it's a place to have nice bases, against Iran, and also to do, intelligence against Russia and China and Pakistan and that sort of thing. So, I mean, there's reasons to be there, surely. But keeping in mind, there was many years that we weren't there, and we continued to grow as a country, right? Because we saw that when we weren't there after, the Soviets were there. As you mentioned earlier, too, the Soviets had to reinforce just to withdraw because the Pashtuns, they do their thing. When they always pursue. The tribes fought it out at that point, too. Some tribal leaders were like, we should just let the Russians go. Others are like, nope, we're going to pursue. And that's what's happening here now as well. I tell you what. It's going to be rough. I mean, it's going to be rough. When you talk with the Afghans and I've asked many of them, what was the worst time in your history that, the old ones, the young ones, and they all say the Civil War, right? Not the Russians were bad, but the Civil War between themselves was worse. And of course, that's what's happening right now is they're going into another civil war because it's not like everybody's going to surrender to the Taliban. The Uzbeks, most of them are not going to surrender. Tajiks are not going to surrender. Hazars certainly are not going to surrender. And a lot of the Pashtun are not going to surrender. And they're just going to do the normal, fish in the aquarium bloodbath thing.
Yeah, it reminds me of a quote where the individual said that you have the watches, but we have the time. And that was actually Osama bin Laden who said that. And what he was essentially, it's pretty poignant when you look at it from a couple of different directions. First of all, what he was alluding to is like, yeah, you have all the technology, that being U.S. and coalition forces, but they just utilize tactical patience and brilliance in the basics. I mean, I know in the training that I had, there were millions of dollars spent on me, both in training and in equipping me, and then a support structure. You figure for every one person that was on the ground in an operational capacity, you're looking at least 5 to 10 other individuals that are supporting that one individual to be on the ground, to be at the quote unquote tip of the spear. So you're talking about a huge iceberg here, and in the operations that were taking place on the ground were just the tip of that. And individuals who were wearing shalwar kameezes and paykols, wearing flip-flops, carrying around an Antonov Kalashnikov that was probably actually rolled off the line in 1947.
Yeah.
All they ever needed was one round, one piece of intelligence, one question, or one explosion. And so really what he was saying when he said that is like, yep, you have the technology, but we will use tactical patience. We will wait you out. And I remember even in certain areas, certain villas I walked into, they called us tourists because they knew it's in their culture that since Alexander the Great, like I mentioned before, Kandahar, by the way, for those who aren't aware, Kandahar is actually named after Alexander. Askandar got ultimately the etymology of it morphed into Kandahar. So anybody who's not like read in on some of this stuff, like the Afghan campaign by Stephen Pressfield, that's a good read. That's a good book because it goes right into the mentality of what it is that Michael's talking about. And so, yeah, they did exactly what Osama bin Laden quoted. You have the watches, we have the time, we'll wait you out, and we will defeat your overwhelming technology.
Okay, I wanted to throw you guys a quick question. I got this on YouTube as well as the question came in on Locals. I should add that Michael and I are both on Locals. I'm AllisonMorrow.locals.com. Are you Michael Yon.locals.com?
Yes.
Okay, so you can go follow him there. But so these are the questions that are about opium, and the question specifically on Locals was who is benefiting from the heroin poppy trade? Heard it was something like 900 tons exported in 2018 and 210,000 tons recently. Who got the money? Please correct my numbers if they are off. Was a heroin export declining under former Taliban rule? I'm curious. Do you guys know anything about that?
I could talk for days on that, but Lynn, you can go. I've written about it extensively since 2006. So yeah, I know a lot about it.
I mean, it's their currency. Yeah, I mean, my personal experience with it is, number one, it's their currency. They would use scrapers. They would collect the opium gum, and they use. And you knew that once, you know, when you heard Biden talking today about the spring fighting season, it just makes me giggle, because it really wasn't dependent on whether or not it was the spring or not. It was just the fighting started once the opium went down, because they didn't have to worry about the fields getting destroyed in the fighting, because that was their currency, that's their money. And you know, then once the opium came down, they had the money to pay for fighting. And you know, I've seen a lot of questions too where people talk about, oh, you were literally you literally were protecting the opium and so on and so forth. Yep. I also saw what the effect of opium eradication programs caused. And you're basically hurting the guy on the lowest end, because the Talibs come in and they pull their tax from those opium farmers. So, you know, I can't really hold it against those guys. They know they have a cash crop. They grow it. I remember walking through, same thing with weed, walking through fields of weed where buds like this big were like sticking to my helmet and stuff. And then you would see your Afghan National Army, Afghan National Police guys, they come out of the field stoned, and you're like, oh, this is great. We're going on mission, and these guys are stoned right now. This is awesome. So it's definitely
stoners with RPGs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like great. You know, as you know, when you go into combat, the first thing you do is like, okay, who's got the RPGs? Because I'm getting way away from those guys. You know, guys with stoned with RPGs, you get into contact and they're like whipping the RPG around and backblasting everybody. And you know, when it comes to opium, by the way, they would measure the unit of measure. They have several units of measure. One of them is the AK-47 bullet. So that's another one. I can't make up stuff. You know what I mean? That's just like out of fiction, but it's true. And so, and another one is AA batteries or AAA batteries. But you know, of course, those batteries weigh different amounts depending on if they're alkaline or whatever. But I mean, but those are their units of measure. But as you know, one of the reasons that opium became such a big crop in Afghanistan was due to the Soviet war, because the Soviets were wiping out the pomegranates, they were wiping out the grapes, the vineyards, they were wiping out the Krez systems. The Krez are the underground irrigation systems. Yeah. I wrote about the Krez systems quite a lot. So if you web search my name and Krez, K-A-R-E-Z, you'll see a lot of photos of them. You'll see a lot of diagrams and that sort of thing. So these Krez systems can be 20 miles of underground tunnels that let the water come through, but they would also use them to smuggle weapons and hide in and that sort of thing. So the Soviets actually had a manual for how to destroy those things. So as they would destroy the Krez systems, these are the Krez systems. Some take decades to build, centuries old. So if the Soviets want to wipe out, say, these 8 villages, they'll just smack that Krez, and then those villages have no water. So they're finished. So one of the things that some of the villages did, they either left or they started growing crops like opium, because opium doesn't need as much water. It's a cash crop, and you, like grapes or tomatoes, you have to pick them and go sell them right then. But opium, none of the DEA guys that I've talked with seem to know how long opium really can last. You've seen the paste and all that, but how long can it really last when you store it? Nobody seems to quite know, but it's in the years. And of course, that much opium, that's a lot of money. That much tomatoes, not so much. So if you have this much opium or this much opium, that's a lot of money, and you can put it on goats, and not goats, but on donkeys, and you can take it through the cold and the heat and everything, and the value chain. With tomatoes, you have to take it and sell it, and the value chain stops right there. You pick it, you go sell it, that's the end of the value chain. Opium, you harvest it, and then it keeps going up, and people keep making more and more money off of it. So this is why the Mujahideen in the old days, they used opium as that became their cash crop for funding the war, just like happened in Thailand, where my office is. My office is in Thailand. So I've researched this quite a lot in Thailand. It was the same issue. They started using just like they do in South America, using drugs as the cash crop to fund wars, and also the drug wars cause wars. So it's kind of a vicious circle. Yeah, the opium business, by the time I left, opium was over 50% of the economy. So we created or helped create the world's largest opium. It's a narco state. Afghan's a narco state. So now it's very well armed. They're much better trained than they've ever been. And they're much more international, because with this increased amount of money, they've never had this much money before. Their ability to travel, and they fight really well in their local terrain. They fight like Comanches, by the way. If you want to study how Afghans Taliban fight, read about Comanches. Like, what was the last book I read on Comanches? Anyway, if you read about Comanche tactics, Taliban are really good at those. For instance, when they hit Bastion, they hit the airfield there and killed the Harrier commander and another Marine, and wiped out those jets. I immediately said, it's got to be no moon, right? So I wrote a dispatch called "When the Moon Sets, Watch Out," and I was basically showing off how much I know about their tactics. I immediately wrote a dispatch saying how I thought they did the attack. And then a Marine major, an intel guy there at Camp Bastion, said, "You were actually extremely accurate, except for a couple of little things." I was like, I bet they started at this village. I came up this micro terrain. They were wearing tennis shoes, They wouldn't be wearing sandals, because that would be big T Taliban, not little T Taliban. Little T wears sandals and that sort of thing. Big T is always wearing good run shoes. And, and it would be no moon. It would be red air. If you study those guys,
running
anytime you see those nice running shoes, and it's a bunch of young guys or fit guys, put them on the ground. I mean, that's Taliban right there. That is not local farmers.
I was in Afghanistan during that time frame. When I left the Marine Corps, I did some work in irregular warfare, teaching human behavior pattern recognition and analysis, and we were working on the insider threat programs. So I went unarmed and embedded into Afghanistan in 2012 to help identify insider threats and to teach. We taught soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines. We taught Albanian forces, Italian, Spanish, Jordanians, Canadians, Australian. I mean, you name them, we taught them. But yeah, that specific circumstance you're talking about too. One of the things that they use, and this goes back to their level of war fighting as far as being true believers, and the level of dedication that they go to, is they were buying the Owl night shot cameras and using the passive IR on those to be able to move at night. And that's exactly like you said. They went on a low light, no light time frame. There was no moon, yep. and that's how they. And they did other things too. They would use things like change blindness. There was one occasion where, because we were in the middle of that transition and you had local nationals on the base, they actually built a fake post slowly over time, and everybody just painted it out as like, oh, it's another post on, like as far as security post on the outer perimeter. And but this post was manned by actual Talibs. And when the time was right, they cut the wire and they let everybody in. And in that situation, it's Cop Keating. So if you look that up, the Cop Keating was overrun. And when we talk about some of these anecdotal stories, it's funny. That all stemmed from something as simple as a zip tie. How important a zip tie was, because the workers were using zip ties to zip tie the wire open so that they could go in and out easier. And it just, over time, people got used to it and complacency set in. But that's what they'll do. It's that tactical patience. They will take their time. And that's how they were so effective.
Yeah, that's right. They did the masking there too. One of the tactical patience, because as you know, a friend of mine that I was in SF with built that runway, by the way. I was there when the first C-130 landed in 2006, I guess. And so I'm pretty familiar with that micro terrain, because we were always out there. And what they did was they, as you know, pretended like they were their shepherds were out there all the time. And of course, by the way, on the cameras using the night vision, I was the one that broke that way back when. That they were using using just normal cameras and that sort of thing. And I was warning our pilots, even when you're blacked out and you got your IR strobes and stuff, they're going to light you up because they're actually taping and mounting these cameras onto their weapons. In fact, one of our helicopters got shot down. You may remember on a moonless night doing a medevac out north of Helmand, I think it was. Just in how they got them, they didn't know. I said, I guarantee you they're using IR cameras that they're buying for $300. I mean, it's really simple to do. They've been using them for a long time. But they use the moon. The bottom line is they fight old school, like Comanches, like Indians, like, and they use the old type, just little stuff, attack with the sun to your back, that sort of stuff. And they're using the ambush tactic. They're using the ambush spots that their grandfathers used. So if you read old books that are like 100 years old, and they'll talk about where ambushes were, you're like, you go up there, there's still an ambush spot there, probably built by their great grandfathers.
Okay, real fast. I'm glad you guys are
I saw that,
it,
Allison.
I actually went out and fed the horses while you were talking, so I'm getting all my chores done. All right. So
She called us chatty Cathy's, Mike.
Yeah, I said sorry to the chat that you guys are chatting together. So 2 topics to throw your way. One is, can Lynn and Michael shed any light on why resistance by the Afghan National Army collapsed? Biden recently told the country that the Afghan army had 300,000 troops compared to 75,000 Taliban, as well as all of the artillery, firearms, ammo, and vehicles supplied to it by the U.S. How could a well-equipped force just fall apart so fast? And then another question goes a little bit before that to Michael's asking on ROKFIN. That was on Locals. Michael's asking on ROKFIN. That I don't know who it was, which one of you guys is repeating Mujahideen or BS, because the Mujahideen was funded by CIA, who gave them Israeli weapons, Charlie Wilson's war, and kind of going back in time to, what the hell happened there? Why were we there anyway? Did it even have anything to do with 9/11? That was the pretext for going in there. We ended up getting Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. So like, what the F? Big picture anyway for what we were doing there. So those are the 2 big questions for you guys. I'll let you chew on. What did you say?
I would love to address the Mujahideen question.
And just for the audience's edification, do either one of you currently work for the CIA?
No.
Okay.
If I did, I couldn't tell you.
Okay, so Michael definitely does now. But seriously, either one of those. Joke. But don't forget to answer both of them. Go ahead.
Well, so yes, with regard to the Mujahideen, the Mujahideen have a long and illustrious history. They are the original freedom fighters. They go well back before Russia in their involvement in Afghanistan, and that is an actual being a Mujahideen is a title. It's just like being a Haji because you made the pilgrimage. It's the same kind of thought process there. So yeah, that's how asymmetrical warfare works. That's how the 20-60-20 model works. When you're working in a multidimensional irregular warfare environment, you are trying to motivate the 60%. Like if you imagine a football field, right? On one end of the football field, you have Oakland Raiders. On the other end of the football field, you got the Broncos, right? There's going to be people that love the Broncos, no matter what they do. The Broncos could lose every opportunity at a Super Bowl. All of their players could be convicted of drugs and rape and DUIs and stuff like that, and they're going to love the Broncos no matter what they do. Meanwhile, on the Raiders side, it wouldn't matter if the Raiders were doing Reading Rainbow, reading for kids, giving all their money up to charity, building people wells, giving them school books, helping cops out, whatever. People are going to hate the Raiders. So you have 20% on either side. Those are true believers. You're not going to affect or impact them in any way, shape, or form. How you get an area to go from a non-permissive area to a permissive area that is co-opted into your support is by motivating that 60%. And they are ambivalent. They are fence riders. Just one day the wind blows, they're like, Americi, good Americi. The next day the wind blows the other way, and they're going to do everything they can to kill you because they don't give a darn about you. They care about their survival. And that's what was happening. And that's exactly what happened with regard to the U.S. and its engagement with the Mujahideen during the their war with Russia. The U.S. was trying to help stop the spread of communism from Russia, and so it wasn't really so much about Afghanistan. It was more about stopping Russia. And the Mujahideen at the time, you have the Northern Alliance and all those other things. They happen to be useful at that point in time. But then as soon as the wind blows and it changes and now we become a useful enemy, then that's what happens. That's what takes place. So I believe firmly that when Trump was trying to sit down and have talks with the Taliban, I think that was an attempt at trying to move the wind change somewhat. I'll personally don't know or think if that would have worked out or not. All I know is that, like Mike said, the culture, the people, Afghans are going to do Afghan things. That's just all there is to it. So, but the Mujahideen is not something new. They've been around for a long, long time, and there's a lot of stoicism with regard to that.
Yeah. Anything else?
Well, Michael, go ahead. Did you have any thoughts on those two questions?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the Taliban came after, of course, we supported the Mujahideen, as did the Saudis, and we put about $5 billion into that. It's the official numbers anyway, and the Saudis matched it in different ways with like Hilux trucks and those sorts of things. And the Saudis dropped oil prices, of course, and which hurt the Soviet economy. And there was many things that we did back during the Soviet war. And then finally they retreated, and then the Soviets had to reinforce to get out, of course. And then when that was over and they were out, then warlordism fell upon Afghanistan and great civil war. And so that continued, and that left it fertile for Al-Qaeda to come in. Now, a lot of people say, we had to attack Afghanistan because 9/11 attack came from there, but yeah, well, it also came from Florida and Germany, because we had Al-Qaeda in Florida and we had Al-Qaeda in Germany, and where else? New Jersey. They were in Somalia. They were, in UAE. They were Egypt. So I mean, it's not just like they were just using that as a base, and that's it. And then we got involved in this heavy-handed war that just continued forever. Now, interestingly, one of my old SF friends, his name is Steve Shawless. We went to the Q course together. We went to DLI together. He built that airstrip at Camp Bastion. He had airplanes all over Afghanistan and offices all over the place before the war, and then became a much bigger player during the war. I mean, he handed me the book Taliban 6 months before the attacks on 9/11. And if you've read that book, and that was right when it came out with, I think, an initial run of about 5,000 copies. The author is Ahmad Rashid. It was a friend of Steve's and a Pakistani guy. And the last paragraph of the book Taliban, I read that before 9/11. It's a stark warning that something's about to happen. The last paragraph, the last 4 or 5 sentences, you should read it. I mean, you should get the book just to read that last paragraph. It was ominous. And for those of us who were actually paying attention to Al-Qaeda back then, we knew something was going to happen. I didn't know what. I didn't know it'd be, hitting the Twin Towers or something like that. I had no idea, really. We could all guess it would blow up some gas ship or something. I didn't know. And when that second plane hit, though, I was like, that's Al-Qaeda. That's it. And Afghanistan. I knew that. It was out there. It was on the table. Everybody should have known. There's a great book, by the way, called The Looming Tower. It's worth reading. It was actually recommended to me by a U.S. general. I read it, and it really lays out in detail, in accurate detail, as far as the parts that I'm aware of. There's much other parts that I'm unaware of, but in the parts where he's describing things that I know about, he's quite accurate. We had all the intelligence before 9/11 to know that it was coming. Everybody, I knew it. I was not in CIA or anything like that. We all knew something was coming. We just didn't know what.
So, okay, well, this is an interesting comment, though. I'm next to Kabul airport and watching the U.S. Air Force plane since the last 19 hours not landing because of chaos inside the airports, which seems about right. Also, there was a question for you guys about Germany. Any involvement or Germany's involvement in any of this? I was told to ask you guys about that. I'm going to try to see if I can find the exact question, but I don't know if that just generally tees you up for that. Sorry, I cannot find it. Well, anyway, there was something asking you guys about Germany, and then can Mr. Yon give us an overview regarding what is wrong with our government to have let this problem simmer for the past 15 years? And then one thing in ROKFIN talking about, I think Joel may have been deployed over there. We failed the 60%. I think this is regarding something Lynn said. We failed the 60% because we never protected the villages. That was the center of gravity. We lived in our super fobs, and the Taliban came in at night to threaten anyone who worked with us.
That's right.
Yeah, they call it a night letter, where they basically post a letter up on your wall, and it says you're stepping outside the box. And basically, if you keep it up, you're going to die an infidel's death, which means I will smite thine enemy at the neck. Be there no rock, nor tree, nor shade of tree that you can hide beneath. Allah will lead me to you. So that's absolutely right.
I'm looking at Flight Radar 24 right now, by the way. I just pulled it up about flights in and out of Afghanistan. There's not a single flight showing over Afghanistan right now. And of course, a lot of our military flights are not going to show up, but some of them do. Like there was a KC one, there was some kind of a refueler last night that left Kabul airport, and I did see that one. But actually, a pilot friend of mine who was flying over last night, he was coming over from another country nearby. He said that he told me, he's like, they just stopped any flights over Afghanistan because they don't have air traffic control. It wasn't a NOTAM. That was just a memorandum they got. So, I mean, you can see right now, I'm looking at Flight Radar 24. There is 0 flights over Afghanistan showing. That's quite interesting.
I just saw, I'm going to try to find it. I just saw a picture on Instagram of like 800 people in a plane meant for 100 people. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Yeah. It's just
and some people hanging on the outside.
Yeah. Right. So can you see this?
Yeah.
This is Nick Palmisciano. I never say his name right. Lynn, he owns Ranger Up, right? The veteran-owned clothing gear company. Yeah, so anyway, he posted this picture. I don't know where he got this from, but yeah, it's crazy. And it's so sad. Like, there's a little baby here in the front drinking a bottle. I mean, it's just nuts. So I think, Biden said today that one of the reasons that it got to this point, besides the fact that they were like, hey, maybe it didn't work out, or it went faster than we thought it was going to, was that he said they were told by the government to not start evacuations because it would make everybody nervous. I don't know if you guys buy that or not, but that was one explanation that he gave, was that it was going to set everybody, and that they wanted, some people didn't want to go because they felt like maybe things could turn around, and wanted to give it a little bit more time. Those were his reasons for how it there are all these people still there that want to get out. But also to the question on locals about specifically someone else said, based on the limited info we know about the withdrawal deals Trump made, do you think the exit would have been better, the same, or worse under his leadership had he been reelected?
You want to take it, Lynn, or should I take it?
Go for it, bro.
I mean, the main thing is, in a case like this, you need to listen to the military advisors. Like I said, a couple of months ago, Petraeus told me this would happen, and there it goes. I mean, it's happening just as he basically told me. And not that he's on active duty anymore, but the people on the ground there could see what General Miller, of course, he resigned. I believe he resigned, right? And so, I mean, we know how the Taliban roll. they will, as soon as they see that weakness, they're going to exploit it. They don't play around. They are action people. They get up and go. They get excited. They want to fight. They love to fight. And you got to give them respect. They fight well. They're good fighters. And now they're excited. One of our special forces teams, I was not on this mission, but one of the guys told me, in a lot of the, Lynn, as you know, in a lot of these mountain ranges, depending on where you're at, it'll only have one entrance and one exit, right? In these, so if you go in there, if you drive in, you're coming out one of two ways. As you know, there's going to be an ambush on both, right? So they got ambushed. They're out there in some like 24 hours of, rolling ambush where they're, now you're getting ambushed in the next spot. And they were watching it from the sky, of course, and big firefights going on. And then later, the Green Beret team, later, when they're out there later, they're like, hey, you guys were flooding out fighting us. I thought we were buds. I thought we were, cooperating together. And, and the people in the villages were like, yeah, but it's really boring out here. This was exciting. I mean, it's not like we don't have anything against you, but, this is like, it's funny, Tom Ricks, the author, kind of left-wing guy, but Tom, he's helped me out a lot, Tom. So anyway, he told me about this book. What was it called? It was from the 1800s. But anyway, when the British were fighting, and then when the war was over, the enemy was, the Afghans were giving an award ceremony, and some of the enemy were there, and they're like, "Where's our medals?" to the British officer. And the British officer's like, "Your medals? You were the enemy." And they're like, "Yeah, but without us, you wouldn't have had a good war." I mean, that's just the way they roll. You know what I mean? War is just part of what they do, that and worshiping Allah. But actually, if you ask Pashtun people, what's more important to them, Islam, and I've asked many of them this, what's more important to you, Pashtun Wali or Islam? Pashtun Wali is like their Pashtun code. That's, as you know it quite well. And every one of them I ever asked said, oh, Pashtun Wali, of course. They're like, we're Pashtun first. We're Muslims next, So they're first they're Pashtun people. So when people say, oh, you have to study Islam to understand them, I'm like, you need to study Pashtun Wali. You need to study their culture, because the cultural substrate is more important. A lot of people get that confused. And they should know this, because, for instance, Christians in Mexico are not the same as the ones in Poland or Italy or China. That cultural substrate is the wood. The religion is the paint, and Pashtuns are first. They're Pashtuns. That's the substrate.
And that's the other thing too, is they'll just as quickly as they'll be like how you described. At the same token, they will, with regard to their enemy, they will, give amazing deference to, in some cases, an enemy over their own. It's just insane the way the mentality works with that. But yeah, my most memorable. I think the most memorable experiences I had were in Afghanistan, and it was not just because of the fighting or whatever, but I met some amazing people there who were Afghans, extremely intelligent, and I think they're. A lot of the reasons why some of the things went the way they did, both in Afghanistan, in Iraq, was we totally misunderstood the people who we were dealing with. And I saw it a lot too. Like, I remember going into Afghanistan my second time going there and hearing Marine commanders and stuff saying statements like, well, when we were in Iraq, I'm like, bro, no. Everything that you experienced in Iraq, yeah, those experiences are relevant, so on and so forth, but you're not in Iraq, baby. This is a horse,
right.
And you need to just wrap your head around that. The tactics end up becoming different. You're dealing with different people. And I just, that's the thing that's really got me kind of turned up about all this, aside from all the brothers and sisters that I've lost in this, campaign, is we did leave a lot of people hanging there. And I don't know is that I got a good answer for how it should have been done differently or better. Like, that's why I let you go first with the whole Trump thing, because who knows, it could have been the same result. And I think it totally depends on how, it's handled at the, the level as far as strategic and tactical planning level, like right there in that middle ground, I think is where a lot of the big confusion and mistakes occurred. Just like I'll give you an example. In 2003 in Iraq, I was there for the initial invasion, and I remember that more focus was put on certain areas in Al-Nasiriyah, Baghdad, and Fallujah, but with regard to the Natural History Museum, that was allowed to be looted and vandalized.
Yeah.
During that, and that made me sick because I remember, I grew up Catholic. I remember going to Sunday school. I know all about the Fertile Crescent. I know all about King Nebuchadnezzar's palace, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. The anthropologists believe that the Garden of Eden was actually in Iraq because of the Fertile Crescent. And I remember walking on the walls in King Nebuchadnezzar's palace and thinking, like, man, this is like, there's biblical history that occurred here, and we let a nation's treasures get looted and vandalized. And again, remember asking the same question, like, what are we doing here? We got so focused, in my eyes, in a lot of cases, on the wrong things. And that's why, whether it was an insurgency in Iraq or in Afghanistan, a failure to totally understand, like you're talking about, the Pashtun culture and the people and how to really get them on board. That's where the failure was. Because they've been sitting there going, like, look, we've been squeezing water out of rocks for 3,000 years. You're not going to teach us anything new.
Yeah.
That's the mindset.
Yeah, it's interesting. I spent a year in Nepal and 2 in Afghanistan, and all over both of those countries. And the problem sets are quite similar. Like, for instance, like you said, more than 80% of the people in both countries live in the small villages, right? And almost all of them were illiterate. But Nepal they started opening up in the 1950s. So they're about 60, 70 years advanced, right? But they're still one of the poorest countries in the world because there's a lot of things that have to happen before you really open up. Like, you have to have actual roads. You have to have bridges. A lot of the difference between having access to the greater world and not is literally like a bridge that could be just like 30 yards long. It's the kind of bridge that you and we would be like, hey, there's a village over here and I got a village over here and we got this small river between us. Afghans will not cooperate to make a bridge, but we would. I'd be like, hey, Lynn, you got some pine trees. I got a chainsaw. Bob's got a pickup truck and Ralph is an engineer. And let's get together next week, have a cookout, plan how to make a bridge. In a couple of weeks, months later, we'd have us a bridge. They will not do that. They have to have they won't do it in Nepal either. Many countries are like this. You have to have some outsider that comes in and gets them lined up and says, okay, guys, I'm going to employ you. We're going to build a bridge. And after we got that done, now we can build a school, right? These sorts of things. It takes I grew up in a place called Winter Haven, Florida. It's called the city of 100 lakes because we have about 100 lakes. And I take all these bridges when I was a kid for granted, because they were already built when I was born. So, but then after I've been to places like Nepal and Afghanistan and so many other countries, I come back and I'm like, these little bridges, they're so important. It's like, but we take them for granted because they're already built by the time we were born. But so when you look at Afghanistan, I had lunch a couple of times with General Barry McCaffrey up in Washington, Virginia, or whatever. And he's like, it's going to take 15 years, Michael. And I was like, it's going to take 100. And there's no way that this is going to be a turnkey country in 15 years. It's not happening, period. It's going to take a century minimum. Build the infrastructure, get schools. You have the hand that rocks the cradle, right? Rules the world. And most of the women there are illiterate. If you have illiterate mothers, you're going to have illiterate babies, right? I mean, almost everybody in Afghanistan is illiterate. The people that are literate are literate in languages like Pashtun or Tajik or whatever. They're not in access languages like English or German or Chinese or Russian or whatever. It's mostly, and they don't read well, even if they do read in Pashtun, most of them, right? So you've got all these things that you've got to do. educate the women. You got it's a huge century. In a century, it can be called a developing country.
I guess something that I'm hearing people talk about a lot, and there's, we got some, criticism in the chat that I about, well, I'll pull it up specifically, but, one of the things you're hearing from the U.S. veteran side is about all the lives that were lost for what, and I remember interviewing a Gold Star mom about this same issue in Iraq several years ago when I was a reporter. And then, there are people who are like, well, what about I'm trying to find the exact quote, but it's specifically saying, what about the war crimes that U.S. committed against people in Afghanistan or Iraq? And so, I guess however you fall on your opinion of war or which, obviously is violent and people die. I'm curious, I guess, what are your thoughts on the cost of the human life, whether, it's from the people who live there, the civilians who get caught in the middle of it, the Afghans, the U.S., the people from all over. It just seems like, that's a talking point I've heard quite a bit. Lynn, obviously, you had several of your teammates die, one of whom's, the 10-year anniversary just passed a few days ago. I don't know how people who are over there involved in that conflict, no matter what side, like how you look at this and your stomach doesn't turn, because it certainly does for me. And I don't know, maybe I just have a different perspective because I've just never been in the military, never been to a situation like that. But what are you guys thinking in regards to that?
What can you do? I'm not going to sit around and drink beer and do drugs and cry about it. We got to move on. We got a country to take care of. The United States is in trouble now. We've got to keep moving. We all lost friends over there in Iraq and Afghanistan, in my case, and I'm sure Lynn as well. And it's just sad. But what are we going to do? I'm not going to sit down and stop. We got a big fight on our hands in the United States, and we got to stay strong. And the veterans who fought in all these wars, they need to be leaders now to pull our country together and not allow us to split apart. I'm not going to sit around and cry about it. I don't have time for that. I don't have time to go drink whiskey and cry about it. No, we got a fight on our hands, and I'm going to stay in it. And we've got to really work our hardest right now to keep the United States from falling into a civil war. We're clearly going the direction right now. It's obvious. Some people still can't see it. They're blind. They're going to run right into the mountain at this rate. It's very sad. We've all seen it, and time to move on.
The fact of the matter is that war is not the ideal method for conflict resolution. It is the bloodiest, messiest thing. There's most certainly going to be civilian casualties that occur with that happens. I saw one of the questions on there that she just posted, I believe by Umad. But as far as I'll address the war criminal thing, I know I can say this as far as for me or any team member that I've ever had, my conscience is clear. We followed lawful orders. We did what we were supposed to do and how we were supposed to do it. The things that keep me up at night are not the things that I did wrong. They were the times when I knew I was looking at a bad guy, but I didn't have what I needed to handle business accordingly, or be able to make a detainment or some kind of arrest or whatever the case was. And you always get left wondering, like, hey, was this the guy that killed Danny Gurr? Was this the guy that got many of our other guys? But that's the thing that, at least as far as I know, that most of us as veterans deal with that, as well as the side of, hey, even thinking about killing another human being, regardless of whether they're quote unquote your enemy or not, is not a natural act. It's not an easy thing to do. And nobody takes it lightly. That is an unbelievable responsibility to have to take when things like that occur. And I personally don't like the picture that gets painted of most veterans who've been in those situations, that some kind of like bloodthirsty or whatever individual.
Yeah.
In fact, it's quite the opposite. I would argue that most veterans, and in law enforcement included, have more respect for life than the average person that spent their whole life playing Call of Duty on the computer, who are desensitized to like, oh, it's just pulling a trigger. That's a whole nother discussion I could get into, but I won't on here. But yeah, it sucks. I remember sitting with several of my colleagues, comrades, whatever you want to call them, and asking these questions like, hey, what do we think this place is going to be like in 10 years? Or you think we're going to ever get an opportunity to come back and see it or whatever? And it's sad to say, is probably no. I remember I took a trip to Vietnam after my second to last deployment to Afghanistan. And I remember seeing Vietnam veterans there touring the old battlefields, touring the tunnels, touring Ho Chi Minh City, and seeing that, well, on one hand, the Vietnamese, they call it the American War. Just perspective is everything, right? At the same token, they still treated those Vietnam veterans with reverence and respect when they came out to see that. So the sad part for me is that I don't see that happening in Iraq or Afghanistan. So it sucks, because you go back to, and I think that's why everybody who served, like me and Mike, are frustrated right now, because we're like, okay, if we were going to just pull out like this, and it's pretty obvious they knew it was going to happen like this, there wasn't something we could have done maybe even 15 years ago or 10 years ago or even 5 years ago to try to go about it a different way. I like to believe and think that we're better than that, but maybe I'm naive.
There were relatively very few war crimes out there, actually. And like, I didn't witness any personally. I know there was some here and there, but it wasn't like, there's more, like when I was just in Washington, D.C., I was there for, oh Lord, I don't know, almost 2 months this last year, 6 weeks at least. And that I saw a lot more criminality in Washington, D.C. on the streets at Black Lives Matter Plaza and that sort of thing than I saw in I saw a lot of combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, but I mean, not actual war crimes. Criminality, I mean, our troops are quite well disciplined. There are some, yeah, and they got to be put in jail. And some did go to jail. And if they got caught, they got investigated, and if the ones who were convicted went to prison, and rightfully so. And it's not anything anybody's proud of. Everybody's ashamed when somebody from their unit commits war crimes. And so, yeah, that was kind of small, actually. And it wasn't because it was covered up. Remember, everybody's got these cell phones these days. If you're out there committing war crimes, that stuff's going to be on video. It's not, you can't hide it like you could in old day wars. There's too many people with video, and not only that, soldiers themselves are making most of the video. When there were crimes, for instance, committed at Abu Ghraib. And guess who made the videos and photos? Soldiers. And it was soldiers who actually then turned it into CID, which is Criminal Investigation Division. And it was the Army, which then released it. It wasn't that was all internal. In other words, soldiers really did commit those crimes. They really did photograph and videotape those crimes. And then another soldier got those photos and videos, and then he gave them to Army Criminal Investigation Division, and then the Army released them. So that was all internal from the Army. That was not the media coming in. That was not Iraqis coming in and doing it. And unfortunately, not enough people were punished. That general should have gone to prison. But I know some Americans are like, we were stopping ambushes or whatever. I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about, for starters. And secondly, when those war crimes were committed to Abu Ghraib, that caused the war to increase. That caused the war to really spike up. It was a great recruitment tool for Al Qaeda and other enemies. And it was a terrible instance. But we got our act together and we cleaned it up. And it took a while, and then the Iraqis saw us as being far more just and far more, better people than that terrible incident at Abu Ghraib, and and then they started trusting us and giving us information to help knock down Al Qaeda and the other enemies there in Iraq. Anyway, this is going about that for hours. Be quiet.
Ali, there's a comment that popped up from Cam's etc. on YouTube, and it says, "This isn't a debate over whether USA should leave Afghanistan. This is about Biden's total disaster over withdrawal. He was asleep at the wheel, and because of that, Americans are trapped and people are dying." I don't think myself or Mike are disagreeing at all as far as what the level of force is, or like a SOFA. Like even in Japan, we have a SOFA agreement. From World War II, we have agreements with much of the European and Bloc European countries from World War II, and that for me that's the same thing. I don't know why we wouldn't have something like that with Afghanistan. That being said, there cannot continue to conduct combat theater operations in Afghanistan. I don't think me or Mike are disagreeing about that whatsoever. But I do think the issue is certainly in how this was handled. Most definitely. This is something that, and here's the thing that's special about Biden is Biden had only been out of it for 4 years when Trump was in office. Let's not forget, as he likes to remind us, he's Barack Obama's vice president. So,
right.
So, okay, man, would you just take a nap for 4 years after you left office, or what was going on?
Okay. Last question. It's probably going to be the most firecracker comment. And then we'll wrap it up. But I figured I'd throw it out there because I think a lot of people who are, sorry, our producer is
I love
going
it when
through
she has something to say too.
My foreign currency collection right now. And here, have a bag of
This is always
blueberries.
the best part of your show. This is the best part of your show. Always. Whenever I'm
she's
watching your
done.
show,
She's like, war is about money, and she just threw money all over the office. Anyway, so this comes from Michael Zaks, who I'll say it would be an underestimation to say he's not a fan. But I'm going to throw this out there because I hear this quite a bit, and I think it'd be fair for you guys to respond. What if you were duped into going to war to destroy other countries by an attack on U.S. elements inside your own government, and you have no interest in the political fallout of exposing this? And so I know that's kind of dropping it there, but a lot of people are just pissed at the United States, just why do we keep doing this? We don't learn from our mistakes. We go in and try to nation build. We go in and try to screw things up. We kill lots of people, and then we just leave, and we're just the bullies of the world. And that this is just an embarrassment, not just in how we're leaving and what we're doing, but that we were there at all, that we just never learn our lesson, and we're still doing that. I think it's a fair question to throw your way. Not something I can answer. So take it away, guys.
Wow. Go with it, Lynn?
Yeah, go for it, Mike.
I mean, obviously, whether it was, the Korean War or Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, but there actually, this might not be popular to say, but there are some things that we have done right. For instance, Thailand, where my office is, we helped Thailand tremendously, CIA and special forces for years, fighting poppy and communist insurgents and whatnot, and they've been quite successful. So we don't, and I'll be the first to, I do it all the time. We're not learning from our mistakes. I've read almost 60 books on pandemic, right? Not 16, but 60, right? So, I'm quite dialed into history of pandemics. And that's something we just don't learn our lessons on, right? And war can be very similar. But also, we don't talk about the cases where we have had some successes. We have had some successes, for instance, in Philippines. We've had some successes in Thailand and many other places, for instance. And we could go on this. We should have another show sometime and talk about World War II. But I would say, and this is going to make some people angry, but the mother and father of independence in Asia is Japan and the United States. I don't know, that can set people off, but it's something I've studied quite a lot. I've been all over Asia for many years. I live in Asia. And I've written 3 books that are published in Japan, so I study these things quite a lot. China. And our 2 countries who fought each other. We basically killed the mother in childbirth. We are the cause of independence in Asia, right? We're the cause of the British and the Dutch and the Russian. Not well, the Russians are obviously still there, but we pushed a lot of those out, right? For instance, after World War II, a lot of people don't realize this, but Thailand was an Axis power, actually, arguably, right? And the British and the French wanted to divide up parts of Thailand after World War II. United States said, no, leave it alone. Thailand helped us. We're going to honor that, and we're going to leave them alone. British, you get out. French, you get out. And meanwhile, Dutch down in Indonesia, they wanted to retake Indonesia, right? The Dutch wanted to retake that place after more than 2,000 of the Japanese stayed after August 15th, 1945, when the war was over. They kept fighting, right? They kept fighting and helping the Dutch. I went to Indonesia many times. I was in Jakarta at the cemeteries, like their Arlington. There's actually Japanese soldiers buried at the front of their Arlington that are mostly, almost everybody in the cemetery is Muslim. So I asked the guard, he was the front gate guard, I was just asking if he could be my tour guide. You can do that in countries like that. So he's the guy up there with the gun and stuff. I'm like, hey, can you just leave your gate and come give me a tour? And he's like, sure, And so I said, why are these non-Muslims buried with the Muslims, the Japanese? He goes, because they're heroes. They helped us beat the Dutch. And so then the Japanese continued to fight after World War II in Indonesia. Almost nobody knows that. And then the United States came in with the counterpunch and said, and not counterpunch to Japan, but to Netherlands, and said, you need to get out. We're not going to help you with rebuilding funds with the Marshall Plan, right? Because the Netherlands was really smashed up by the Nazis, and but then the Netherlands was going back. But what I'm getting to is we have done a lot of good. So it's not true to say that we screw everything up. We just screw a lot of things up. And when we do it spectacularly. I mean, when we just screwed up in Afghanistan, we did it in a very spectacular fashion. But a lot of these things we do succeed in, you don't really see them because they're kind of quiet, and why would you even look? It's not on fire, right? So it's not. Yeah, I lived in Germany. I lived in Europe for 6 years, right? I speak German. I lived in Germany for 4 years, Poland for 2. We were the main force in cracking the Soviet Union, right? We were the main force. The Catholic Church was also very important, and there were other players. For instance, the Polish. We supported the Polish quite a lot with a CIA operation called QR Helpful, which we ran out of France and did parts of it out of Sweden and UK and whatnot. Anyway, bottom line is, it was the United States, especially Reagan, that came in and said, no, we're not gonna just have a happy conversation with the Soviets. We're coming to knock them out, tear down that wall. And with the many things that we did, for instance, pinning them in Afghanistan, bleeding them in Afghanistan, getting the Saudis to drop their oil prices, brilliant pebbles, all the SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative with the Star Wars and all these things, pushing the Soviets to invest in the military they could not afford, QR Helpful CIA operation in Poland, and all these other things. Boom, we collapsed the Soviet Union. Did it. And all these, I was just in Lithuania. I just came in from Lithuania about 10 days ago, went straight to the jungle in Panama. We are the cause in the Polish church, not the Polish church, the Catholic Church, and some others, why these countries are now free. So we have done a lot of great things. But, when we screw up, it's like the Challenger go at throttle up. It's all over the news, and it's terrible.
Well, it's a good point you make, because here's an example of a time when we did not become involved because it was following directly on the heels of the Vietnam War, and that was the Cambodian genocide. And there was 3 generations of people who were lost in that, who were killed, and we turned a blind eye to it. We almost did not get involved in World War II, had it not been for the attack on Pearl Harbor. And then the last thing I'll add to that is, I remember when I was on deployment in Albania, because we were still knee deep in the middle of dealing with Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, and basically the war in Kosovo. And it was only during that time frame when, Slobodan Milosevic was removed from power, and the amount of genocide and thing that was going on there. And everybody got distracted from that when 9/11 happened. And then the next thing I knew, we were in Iraq. So, everybody has a very kind of a short memory span, short attention span when it comes to this stuff. And I agree with you. Like, yeah, nothing's ever perfect about any of that. But I would not want to see a world where, and we're seeing it too. Like some comments were made in the chat about the U.S. getting its act together with regard to our domestic stuff and so on and so forth. But we can't be Rip Van Winkle and totally be so focused inwardly and go internal that we're not keeping an eye on what's going on around us. Because like you mentioned on the previous interview you did with Allison, like, yeah, we have a border that looks like a sieve right now. And if we're not going to extend our reach as far as, you'll know what I'm talking about, Mike. We have what's called a defense in depth. So by having MPs, by having strategic footholds in places like Guam, in the Middle East, in Asia, in Europe, like that's part of our defense in depth. But if you leave a seam or a gap anywhere within that defense in depth, just like you're covering right now with all this migration and movements of people, we're opening ourselves up. We're opening the kimono up to some really brutal problems. And I just looked it up. This is one book I remember reading when I was on that deployment. I read Black Hawk Down before the movie came out. And it's a book called Balkan Ghosts that people should check out. It's kind of a travel book, but it is about some of the historical things that were taking place in the Balkans, leading all the way up from like the assassination that triggered World War I, all the way up into the ethnic cleansing. And I mean, there's a lot of things out there. Like, I don't know. Like you said, we don't do everything perfect, but there's good examples of what happens when we turn a blind eye, like Cambodian genocide, like the genocide in Turkey. Kind of things. The Pan-Arab Union went away because if you look at Iraq alone, like the flag in Iraq had 3 stars across the top of it to symbolize the Pan-Arab Union of Iraq, Jordan, and Syria. And the God is Great was written in Arabic. It's allegedly in Saddam Hussein's own handwriting. And over the course of that time frame when we were in Iraq, the people changed it. They got rid of the stars, denoting that, we are our own sovereign country. We are not a part of the Pan-Arab Union. And then they got rid of Saddam Hussein's handwriting and put it in regular Kufic script to show that, they are a sovereign nation of people. Like, that kind of change is symbolic. And we shouldn't just paint it out. We should not miss it. But we do. And then we make comments like, oh, they're just JV. And well, here you go.
Lynn, I got to go because I got something else coming up, but I can come on in the next few days and talk. I would love to talk about this for hours. All kinds of topics went on. We could have taken side channels. There's a lot of side channels we could take for hours, but I got to go right now.
I know. I just hope Allie can come back in and kick the stream off because she's the one who's in control of this thing. There she goes.
Are you guys done? Okay.
Yeah. I gotta go.
You got tired of hearing me talk.
No.
Go, Mike. Go. We're gonna end the stream. Thank you so much for spending so much time. Bye, everybody.
Bye, Allison.